Thank you, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Florida, I'm originally a Midwesterner. I grew up in Nebraska, but got to Texas as quick as I could. And we get to Florida even quicker. We love this state, and in particular, I love Tampa. I love the work that's being done here. And so I'm honored to be with you today. And my sort of assignment in this first session is, in a simple way, to say, what's one thing, if I could give you one thing from 42 years of ministry experience, what would I tell you? I realize there's all varieties or sizes, some new church plants, some a little further along the way. I've been involved in 2 church plants over 42 years. So I've seen them grow from a few people. When my wife and I were involved in our first church plant, we were part of 11 people that were sent out to start a new church. And we got to experience what God's blessing and life is at every level of the church. And so this morning, if I were to title this message, it would be the model of ministry that God blesses. The model of ministry that God blesses. Before I go there, on your seat, let me just tell you what you're sitting on, or you moved in order to be able to sit down. In November, I'm now a part, I've been sent out from Gateway to start an Executive Leadership Institute, and we're going to be back in November at the Crossing Church here in Tampa to do an Executive Pastor School. A number of years ago, Pastor Robert said to me, I know a book that you and I need to write. And I said, well, what book is that? And he said, Every Pastor Needs a Tom Lane. And I went, that'd sell about 6 copies, and most of them to my family. You know, what would we want to write a book? And he said, no, the most frequent question I get asked is, how do I get someone to help me like you have with Tom Lane? And that started a process to how do we help pastors, how do we help churches develop an executive leadership team around them to both vocational and volunteer to help them fulfill what God has called them to do. And so we call it Executive Pastor School. It's for senior leaders. It's for people who feel a call into ministry, or maybe are already in ministry, but don't feel the burden to be the primary vision caster, to be the senior leader. They want to support somebody, but how do they do that? And then it's for executive team members to know how you interrelate in a way that produces God's fullest work. So it'll be a 2-day or day and a half event, the November 7th and 8th at the Crossing Church, and we'd love to have you if you have an interest. You don't have to be a church of any size. You don't even have to be in ministry. If you know somebody who's interested in serving in a second seat role, this would be a great place for them to come. They'll be exposed. If you know a senior leader and he feels overwhelmed by the responsibilities of the church and its growth, this would be a great place to encourage him to come. So that's what that information is on your seat. Well, over the years, I've recognized something from my perspective of observing God's work in a new startup to the mature or developed growth that I've experienced at Trinity Fellowship, where I served for 22 years in Amarillo, and then Gateway Church, where I've served now for 20 years. And the process is this: no matter what size you are, from the very first beginning with a few people to however it grows, there is a model that we follow, whether we realize it or not, whether we know it or not. And I get this from Ezekiel chapter 44. If you want to just mark that down, I'm going to refer to it. You can go back. I'd encourage you to read the whole chapter. But in Ezekiel 44, God is addressing the priests. So the nation of Israel is in captivity, and he's addressing the priests who have ministered during the captivity, during the captivity of Israel. And he addresses three specific groups of priests in that chapter. And that's what I'm going to address today. But let me just give some context or some guidelines for this. Ministry, all the ministry that we do is for God, but to people. We're called by God to occupy a place of influence, and really and truly, our ministry is to God. You know, Psalm says, come bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who stand by night in the house of the Lord. What we're doing is we're serving for and ministering to God as we minister to people. God uses people to minister to people. And so part of the process we have to regularly remind ourselves is when people frustrate us. I've heard a number of times pastor friends say, you know, ministry would be easy if it wasn't for people. No, we have to remind ourselves when we're dealing with people that people minister to people. I know you're dealing with a tough situation. I know you're demanding things and without in any way understanding what is going on in my life, but you're demanding from me. And God says, I know what you're dealing with. People minister to people. And then the third thing is God is as interested in our method of ministry as the result it produces. I think oftentimes we think that God is a bottom line worker of ministry events, so that if we produce, we grow our church, we produce an effect in a person's life, it doesn't matter how that was produced, God will be pleased. And he says, no, I'm as interested in how you do what you do as what you do. So that's the key to understanding these principles that are a part of God's work. A ministry grows and matures into its full purpose and enjoys the blessings of success if it is diligent to keep the pattern with which God can bless. I don't know of any pastor over all my years in ministry who has one day been excited about ministry, been thrilled about what God is doing, and the next day wakes up and goes, I'm done. I'm so burned out, I don't care. It happens over a span of time, and incrementally it develops into a work that presses on his heart and spirit to lead him to the place of saying, I don't want to do this anymore. What was fun isn't fun anymore. I don't like what I feel, what I think, what I see. I'm done. No matter how successful we as individuals are or our church is, we can't sustain our success if we deviate from the pattern that God blesses. And the incremental difference between the models that I'm going to share with you today is minuscule, but it changes everything. Okay, so to understand this, I put it in this context. Every ministry, everything that we do involves three things. It involves focus. It involves what I call the field, because these things are easy if they all start with the same letter, right? So it involves focus. The focus is the intent with which that drives our effort. What are you focused on? What's the focus that has brought you into this particular aspect of work? We're willing to make personal sacrifices to accomplish our focus. We anticipate God's partnership and look for his leading in circumstances and relationship based on our focus. And we seek God, and we extend faith based on where our focus is. The second is the focus, the field, to match the F. The field is the beneficiary of our work. We would call it the congregation or the people or the person that we're ministering to. We recognize that the result of our work is to help people make a connection with God. We work to identify and remove the barriers that exist to keep people from connecting with God. And we help people identify and remove the source of those barriers, whether they be spiritual, emotional, or physical. And then the third is the facilitator of ministry. So it's the focus, who we're trying to please, what we're looking at, and has initiated our ministry. It's the field or the beneficiary of the work that we do, and then it's the facilitator. Facilitators are the programs. They're the resources, the equipment, the tools that we use to accomplish ministry. Things that are tools, however, become worn out. They become obsolete, or they become irrelevant over time. They fulfill their purpose, and when they are fully used and consumed in service for God and people, they need to be retired or set aside or changed in what takes place. So we have our focus, we have our field, and we have the thing that facilitates. So in Ezekiel 44, it actually begins with a rejected model of ministry as it addresses the priests. And in the rejected model of ministry, the focus are the programs of what took place. So Ezekiel 44, and let me just read verse 7, verse 6. You shall say to the rebellious ones, to the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, enough of all your abominations, O house of Israel, when you brought in foreigners, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary. The pressure of ministry in the captivity led the priest to fill positions by looking at and maintain positions that facilitated programs by just anybody, a live body will work. And I think about these, and I think sometimes we are less concerned about the spiritual nature of the people that serve, and we're more interested in facilitating the program, continuing the program. And so we know we need children's ministry to help our weekend service, and we don't have enough volunteers for the children's ministry, so we'll take anybody. Believer, unbeliever, it doesn't matter. The idea is we've got to have the program of ministry. We feel that if we maintain the program, that God is going to be benefited. It's what He's calling us to do. We're facilitating and advancing. We're serving in the field that He wants us to minister, and the facilitator of that is people. And God says, if you embrace that model of ministry, I will reject it. That's what He said to the priests there. I reject you. I'll have no more of your abominations in the way that you have done this. Then it begins. Oh, let me just say this. When programs are the focus, people become the fuel to sustain the program. When I use you, when you no longer can benefit the program, I discard you. You're just fuel to me, because the programs have been effective, maybe even were initiated in obedience to God. They continue to minister to God, and therefore they must be sustained. We make that assumption that God's pleased, that God initiated this, but now we have to maintain it, rather than saying it served its useful purpose, it needs to be retired, or it needs to be changed. We sustain the program when God has removed Himself from the program itself. God is presumed to be pleased because the program is helping so many people. Programs take on an idol status then must be protected and promoted regardless of the cost. At this point, the impact on the people that fuel the program doesn't really matter because it's the program that counts. It's the program that we're focused on. So, here's some things to address if you're in a restricted model of ministry. Know those who labor among you. Scale back ministry if needed so you don't fill ministry slots with unqualified, unsaved individuals. Make that a requirement first. Now, I can tell you this. We have offered in my 20 years at Gateway what we call serve opportunities. They're light in. If you come and engage in our ministry, you could serve here. But you can serve only at a certain level until we know you and understand the condition of your life. We're first here to minister to you and bring you in relationship with God. Now, let me say this. In the early stages of church planting, we know everybody. You know when somebody's visiting, when they've come in for the first time. Is anybody visiting? And you stare at the person that you don't recognize. It's like, I know, and I get to know. I may even have said, hey, do you have any plans for lunch today? Why don't we go out to lunch? I want to get to know you, and I know intimately the people that are engaged in the work that is being done. But if the church grows at all, and we establish the supporting ministries to help it grow, it won't take long before I don't know everybody that's ministering. I don't know their name. I don't know the quality of their relationship with God. And we have to have systems or mechanisms to be able to identify that and train them and make sure that their life in God is before their service to God. So, know those that labor among you. Stop or suspend programs that have run their effectiveness. Now, I can tell you this, I think this actually falls into sort of two categories in my experience. One is if you are a doer and I don't, once I start something, I really don't want to change it unless I can replace it with something better. Sometimes you won't find better until you stop what is being ineffective. You go, well, what are we going to do if we stop this? How are we going to take care of this group of people? And it's like, I don't know, but I don't believe that God is anointing this particular program anymore, so let's just stop it. Let's move it, let's mothball it. Let's set it aside. We need to suspend it for a period of time and review what God is saying about this particular program. So the first is that. The second is a fear that because there's an influential person or family that has been a part of initiating this program, if we stop the program, even though we acknowledge it doesn't have life, if we stop the program, it's going to offend that family. They might leave the church, and we can't afford to lose them. So we're better to maintain the program than we are to lose this family. We don't realize that by doing that, we've just made the program more important than God. Establish the scope of ministry in response to God. That's the thing we have to constantly remember. So, if the program is the focus, and we think God will be ministered to in the program, and people are responsible, we're recruiting people to facilitate the program, we're in a rejected model of ministry. Then it goes on in Ezekiel to talk about an accepted model of ministry. Ezekiel 44 and verse 11, yet they shall be ministers in my sanctuary. Okay, let me start with verse 10. But the Levites, who went far from me when Israel went astray, who went astray from me after their idols shall bear the punishment of their iniquity. Yet they shall be ministers in my sanctuary, having oversight at the gates of the house and ministering in the house. So if you read on from 10 to 14, what God is speaking to is there's a group of ministers that actually cared about the people. They wanted to help the people, and so the people became the focus. How can we minister and care for the people? The programs facilitated the work of the people, and God, the programs were the field with which the people were cared for, and God facilitated it. And in response to that, God says, well, you can minister in my house. You can work in my field, but you're not going to come into the Holy of Holies in that chapter. Now, when I do consulting, and I'm meeting with a church pastor and leader, and he says, we don't understand. We can track that we had this many new people come to our church. We actually have cards. We've actually contacted them. We had this many people come through our new member class, whatever you call that. and they say, but at the end of the year, we don't have any, we're the same number of people as we were at the beginning of the year. The first thing I look at is the model of ministry that they're using. Because I think that's the accepted model of ministry, where people are the focus. So you're focused on helping people. Programs are the beneficiary of that. They are the work, they're the thing that benefits the people. And you're trusting God to facilitate that work. When this is the case, when people are the focus, it's assumed that God's heart is pleased because we've taken care of the people's needs, demands, and desires. Governing the church becomes political, with secret meeting and faction groups lobbying for their interest. Decision-making is in response to the people and the demographics that are being done. There might even be such things in a board meeting or in staff meeting or response from volunteer leaders in the group that the people are crying out. The people need this. Why aren't we doing this for the people? Now, hear me in this. People minister to people. God wants us to minister to people. The issue is, where is your focus? And too often, especially in the early days of our ministry development, our focus is on keeping people. We want to help people, but it's also on keeping people. And God says, if your focus is on people, I will accept you. I will accept your work, but you're going to put in a lot of work for not much fruit. It incorrectly assumes that because we're focused on people, God's blessing will be on it, and it's just not true. And so imagine these models of ministry as a belt on an engine. The engine is running, it is moving a pulley over here, and the most efficient way for that engine to work is if the belt is completely centered on the pulleys and pulling in its full rhythm. It takes just a little incremental adjustment, out of adjustment, to burn up the belt on the pulleys or to make the pulleys inefficient in their work. This is what I think about this. Things to address if you've slipped into an accepted model of ministry: the fear of man within yourself or your staff. It's characterized by seeking people's opinions more than God's direction. Taking polls as a method of decision making. Seeking to look good or be safe rather than being obedient to what God says. It has to do with your definition of ministry. People minister to people and programs facilitate the work of ministry. Ministry is sensitive to the needs of people, but not built on what the people want. Notice just the slight difference there. We must, if we're ministering, we must take care of people. We must address and meet their needs. But if we only respond based on the cries of the people and not based on our focus on God, we'll operate in an accepted model of ministry. Your government structure that politicizes decision-making based on what people want or how popular the decision is with the people. We must not allow or encourage systems of communication designed to get to people to support or resist a certain program. Maybe there's a particular leader in your group, whether it's an elder or a volunteer leader, and they feel that their responsibility is to represent a group. I represent the youth of this church, or I represent the senior saints of this group. Well, there's nothing wrong in having advocates for areas of ministry, but as soon as you start allowing that mindset that we are representatives of the people and the people want, then you're sliding toward this accepted model of ministry where God says, if you're going to be pressured out of the fear of men rather than out of response to me, I'll accept your ministry, but you won't enter into the Holy of Holies. Your measure of success in ministry is without regard to the methods employed to produce the ministry. Remember, God is as concerned with our methods as he is with our results. That's the accepted model of ministry, and that's where people are the focus. The program is the field that is being addressed, and God is the facilitator. And then we get to the blessed model of ministry. I heard a guy one time saying he worked for the Federal Reserve, and they were doing a seminar on counterfeit money. They were teaching, I think it was FBI agents, how do you recognize counterfeit money? And he said, we don't show them every kind of counterfeit money that is made. We show them the real money and teach them to recognize the real money. And as they recognize the real money, then the counterfeit becomes easy to identify. That's what we need to do, is understand and focus on this blessed model of ministry. Ezekiel 44 and verse 15, but the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok, who kept charge of my sanctuary when the sons of Israel went astray from me, shall come near to me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer me the fat and the blood, declares the Lord. They shall enter my sanctuary. They shall come near to my table to minister to me and keep my charge. When God is the focus, order and substance are in balance and intimacy results. I want God to be the priority of my life. I want God to be the priority of my ministry. I want God. It's a balance and an order. God is sought and obeyed, resulting in a theocratic, a God structure of ministry. If we really believe in the theocracy of God's kingdom, that it's God's kingdom, he's in charge, our church belongs to him, and we're seeking to fulfill what he wants for our church, then he's got to be first. Amen. He's got to be in charge. People are ministered to and cared for and trained and equipped in this model of ministry. Programs are a tool that facilitate ministry and care to people. Programs exist only as long as they facilitate the ministry that they do, and they don't have a life of their own. We're not going to sustain them just because they've been successful over how many years, or they built a part of what is the ministry today. We're going to honor the past, and we're going to respond to God's leading in our life. So, things to do that protect a blessed model of ministry. Be strategic in seeking God's will. Identify and guard against sacred cows in your ministry. Maybe you haven't really ever talked about it, but is there something they go, yeah, no, we're not going to go there. We're not going to talk about that. That's run by so-and-so, and that's off limits. Got to be careful. Everything needs to be held before God with open hands so that as we do, God can say, okay, I see this. I want you to give me that. Be strategic in seeking God's will. Identify and guard against sacred cows. Develop and maintain a culture of change in response to God's voice. Oftentimes when I would do staff development or when I would speak to leaders, I would say, we have built a culture of change here. If you come into our ministry to serve in any capacity, on staff or volunteer, and you resist change, you won't be happy in this place. Because we do our best not to have any sacred cows. We do our best to seek God, and when we feel change is in order, we will change regardless of what that involves. You have to prepare people for that so that when change impacts them, everybody's all good idea for change until it's change that affects them. Right. And then it's like, no, I didn't say, no, I don't agree with that. No, I'm not for that. Well, you have to prepare them in advance. Remember, we talked about this. Elevate results of ministry and without partiality and eliminate ineffective ministry. Elevate the results of ministry that God is wanting, and without partiality, stop ineffective ministry. So, this model is a model where God is the focus, people are the beneficiary, and programs, assets, resources are used to facilitate those two. God says, if you'll do that, I'll bless ministry. So let me give you just a couple of examples about this. Early on, we were trying to build a community within our small groups. And so we were encouraging people to have home groups, life groups, whatever you would call them in your church, and to meet in the home. And we started having people who said, hey, I'm having some great attendance in my home. I'm running short of chairs to facilitate the work. And can I come up to the church and get some folding chairs? So we started loaning out our folding chairs, and they stopped coming back to us. We forgot. We gave it to so-and-so, or we did so-and-so. And so in response to that, we had our facilities team who said, nope, you can't take chairs out of the building. You can't take chairs out of the building because you'll take them and you may not bring them back. And regardless of what people said, it's like, no, we'll actually bring them back next day, promise. We'll bring them back. No, can't do it. All of a sudden, the chairs became more important than the people that sat in them. The chairs became more important than what God was doing through the community that was being built in those events. It's like, stop, hold on. Yes, we need to build systems that make sure we get our chairs back, yes. But that doesn't mean we can stop facilitating the work that God is doing in building community by saying no. A number of years ago, we had a lady who was leading our prayer ministry, and she came to me one day and she said, I've been praying about this idea and I want to know if it's okay. And I said, well, okay, tell me about it. And she said, I would like to cull through the archive of Pastor Robert's messages, and I'd like to select the 40 best messages that we can find. And I have a team. I've already assembled a team, and we're going to go through and we're going to boil them down into a devotional, a 40-day devotional. We'll write the devotional, and then I want to hand it out to the congregation. I said, we've been praying about this. We really think it's a good thing. And the thing that caught my attention was we've been praying. So God was the focus of this. The people were the beneficiary, having a boiled down devotional thought to start the new year, and we could help facilitate that. So I said, that's an awesome idea. I love that. Yeah, let's do that. So her and her team, they culled through the messages. They found the 40 best. They boiled them down into daily devotions. And she came back and she said, well, now what do I do? I've got them done, but I need to, how do I distribute them to the people, and how do I print? And I said, well, you need to go to our graphics team. They'll help you lay it out, and they can get you, they can help you get it printed. So she goes to the graphics team, and the graphics team says, man, this is awesome. Have you thought about recording this? No, never thought about that. Well, if you're going to record it, you have to go to the worship department because they're responsible for all of that. And so she goes to the worship department, and the worship department says, this is awesome. What if we wrote some music to go along with this? And it's like, yeah, that's a good idea. But if we're going to do that, I think I'm going to do a scripture to memorize and a guided prayer. And all of a sudden, this robust devotional got developed. So the first year we offered it. It was hugely, it really ministered to people. And, we followed almost by accident a blessed model. God was the focus of this. Why don't we do this? I've been praying about it. I think this is a God idea. Yep, I agree it's a God idea. Let's do it. The people were benefited, and we used resources to produce this. It was so excited, so well received, we actually did 2 that year. We started January, the first 40 days, and as we saw the response of the people, we then produced another 40-day devotional right behind it. So the first 80 days of that year, we had 2 devotionals. Well, every year after that, we followed this pattern. Sometime in the summer, someone from our media team would come and they would say to me, are we going to do a devotional next year? And I said, well, I don't know. Let me check. So then I went to Pastor Robert and I said, Pastor Robert, is it in your heart to do a devotional for next year? And he'd say, I don't know, let me pray. Okay. And so then he'd come back and say, yeah, I really believe we're supposed to do a devotional, and here's the subject that I think the devotional ought to be on. And so we did that for about 7 or 8 years. Every year, producing a devotional with music. It was recorded so that if you wanted it, you could get it on CD or a digital file when that became real, so that you could listen to it on your way to work if you were driving in. And every year, it just had God's life on it. And every year, we approached it from the standpoint of, God, this is yours. Is it what you want us to do this year, or do you want us to stop? So about 8 years into it, the media team comes to me like they always do, and they said, hey, Tom, are we going to do a devotional this year? And they said, we've actually been looking at our devotionals and the subject matter that we've had each year for the devotionals, and we think there's a hole, subject matter hole. Could we do a devotional this year on this? And I said, well, I don't know. So as I had done for many years before that, went to Pastor Robert and I said, Pastor Robert, the media team came and they want to do a devotional this year on this subject. They feel like in all the subjects we've done, there's this hole that we need to fill with content. And what do you say about that? And he said, yeah, that's fine. I don't know if you, just from what I said, if you could tell just the slight incremental difference, but I didn't say, is it in your heart? He said, I don't know, let me pray. He just said, yeah, go ahead. So I go back to the media team and I said, yeah, Pastor Robert said it's fine, go ahead and do the devotional on that. A month goes by, or maybe 6 weeks, and the director comes and she goes, it's not working. And I said, what do you mean it's not working? I said, it's like our writers have writer's block. They just can't, it's not like anything that we've experienced in the past. And just like that, the Lord just spoke in my heart. Yeah, if you want to operate in a rejected model, you can. But you didn't ask me. And I went, oh my gosh, I believe this, I teach this, I talk about it in our staff, I talk about it other places. Oh my gosh. I said, just hold everything. Let me go back and talk to Pastor Robert. So I went back to Pastor Robert and I said, I messed up. And he said, what? What do you mean you messed up? I said, I messed up. The writers are having trouble coming up with a devotional on the content that I offered you, and I realized I didn't follow what I believe. Do you think God wants us to do a devotional this year? And he got this smile on his face, and he said, I don't know. Let me pray. So he took 10 days, 2 weeks, came back and said, yeah, we're doing a devotional this year. And here's the subject matter of our devotion. It wasn't where the hole was. It was what God wanted to meet the needs of the people. And so I go back to the lady doing the project, and I said, okay, we're doing it, but not on the subject that we had talked about. Here's the subject, and like that. The heavens opened up, the writer's block was cleared, and the devotional was produced. It happens on the macro level in our churches if we think we know what God wants and we're going to do it our way. God says, I'm gonna reject, or at the very least, I'm going to accept. But if you want me to bless what you're doing, then it starts by seeking me and being obedient to what God, what I'm speaking to you to fulfill. But it happens in the smallest instances with people in our organization, volunteers. Are we seeking God? Is our desire to do what God wants us to do? And you don't have to make it too difficult. You don't have to make it a religious response. You just have to make it real. Are you praying about this? Is what you're suggesting, has it been initiated, has it been birthed in prayer, or has it been in response to people, or has it been in response to a program that you feel like you have to sustain? Does that make sense? It is the single most, when people would come to me and say, hey, can you tell me what's the secret of the success of the ministries that you've been involved in? And I would say, well, I can tell you this, there's really not any way to explain what we've experienced except to say it's God. And most of the time they give me this look like, oh, so you're not going to share. It's like the secret formula is locked in the safe, and it's proprietary. You don't. And so finally I started thinking, I said, well, okay, I think I know what you're asking, but if I said, well, I think we have presence-driven worship, well, there's other places that have presence-driven worship. Well, I think we have solid biblical teaching, well, there's other places that have solid biblical teaching. Everything that I could think of, this is why. It was like, no, you can do all of those things, and if God doesn't put his stamp on it, it's not going to matter. And so I then began saying, okay, I'm going to tell you what it is. And this is applicable where you are today. This is the process. It's the process that God blesses. So if you would put that up on the screen that I gave you, just in case you want to take a picture of this. And these are the models of ministry. So there's the focus of ministry, it's the facilitator of ministry, and it's the field of ministry. So that got misaligned there, but you get the idea. If the focus is God and the field is the people, then programs facilitate. If the program is the focus, and we think God will be blessed because we're carrying on the program, and the people facilitate it, he will reject that. And the rejected model is the program. If we think that's all messed up. Yeah, can you? It's out of order, and shouldn't have been that. So don't take a picture of that because it's going to mess you up. God's the focus, people are the beneficiary, and stuff is consumed in the service of those two. Now think about this. If you're a church plant, the church plants I was involved in, this was just natural. I didn't have to know about this model of ministry. It's like I knew, God, if you don't show up this weekend, we're not going to have church. You know, if you don't give us revelation, if you don't provide resources, God, we need you. God was the focus in what we were doing. It's the incremental difference as things begin to grow that changes the model, and before we know it, we wake up one day and what was easy isn't easy anymore. What was fun isn't fun anymore. And here's just a brief sort of fact that I know. Pastors are stressed out today at probably unlike any other time in history. They're carrying loads. They arrive at a place of, I don't want to do this anymore. Could it be that part of the reason they are is because they're operating under a model of ministry that God won't bless? Okay, so I think I'm 5 minutes away. So let me pause a minute and say, anybody have a question? Was I clear in the way that it communicated, and did I create anything that you go, I need clarity of this?
I do have a question.
Yes, sir, David.
So suppose that we really want to get the blessed model.
Yep.
But right now we recognize we're somewhere between rejected and accepted. We're not even sure. We just know we feel the weight. It needs to change. What's our next step?
Okay. So the question, or his question was, suppose we're somewhere between the accepted and blessed model, or what's our next step? How do we get where we need to go? Well, the first thing, I think, like any time we mess up, we own up. You know, if you feel convicted that an area of ministry is out of the proper model, then just say, God, I'm sorry. We've just like I did with our devotional, start by saying, man, I didn't even realize it. I messed up. Would you forgive me? And then say, what do you want me to do? It takes courage sometimes, once we hear what God is saying, to actually implement what we think he said. You know, if when you do that, he says, I want you to stop doing that. Okay, I think God in his mercy and grace will allow us a process of time to be able to do that, so that you own it, and then you say, how am I going to do this? Well, I'm going to unwrap it because I know it's going to have impact on people. So I'm going to talk to my leaders. I'm going to talk to my team. I'm going to tell them why I feel this. why I'm doing this. I think the reason that people resist the work that the way we're trying to lead them is because they want to understand our motive. I just say this, I subscribe to what I call is the 80-10-10 model of ministry. And so when you're talking about change, there's 10% of any group that as soon as you mention we're going to, they go, yes, it's about time. We've been waiting for this change to come about. And there's 10% at the other end who wouldn't change even if Jesus himself made the announcement. It's like, no, we don't like change. That leaves 80% that are good-hearted, love God, and what they need is they need time to pray, and they need information, and as they do, they'll come along with you. So start with, I messed up. I didn't lead the way I should. I've put my focus in the wrong place, or I allowed the focus to be in the wrong place, and then communicate. You got to lead your team to embrace the same truth that you're embracing that will become the motivator for the change, realizing that some people, even with time, are not going to get there. So you're not trying to get everybody to buy in. What you're trying to do is communicate so they can understand the motive and allow God to bring conviction, and then you have to pull the trigger, and that takes courage. Okay? Pastor.